I was never meant to find it. But once I did, I couldn't make myself forget it. What would you do if the person you loved, the one lying in a hospital bed barely holding on, turned out to be someone you never really knew at all? Because that's exactly what happened to me. And the worst part? He never said a single word about any of it. 6 weeks ago, my life split cleanly into 2 versions. Before the hospital and after. Before, everything felt ordinary. Not perfect, but settled. We had our routines, our shared responsibilities, the quiet rhythm of a long marriage. We raised children together. We paid the bills. We argued about small things, washing, food shopping, whose turn it was to drive, whether someone had forgotten to put the kettle on. The sort of things that felt meaningless at the time. Now, I would give anything to go back to those arguments. It started in the middle of the night. I remember the sound first. Not his voice, he couldn't even call out, but this awful choking noise beside me. I woke up disoriented, confused, and then I saw him. His skin looked wrong, pale, damp. His breathing was shallow and uneven, like his body was fighting something it couldn't beat. I rang 999 with shaking hands. Everything after that felt like a blur of sirens, bright hospital lights, and doctors speaking in urgent tones I could barely follow. They said the words, septic shock. I didn't even know what that meant at the time, but the way they looked at me, I knew it was bad, really bad. They intubated him, put him under sedation. Machines started breathing for him. Tubes, wires, monitors. Suddenly, my husband wasn't just a person anymore. He was a patient, a case, a body being kept alive by equipment. And then his heart stopped twice. I remember standing outside the room, gripping the wall because my legs wouldn't hold me up, listening to the alarms, watching people rush in, hearing someone say, "We're losing him," but they didn't. They brought him back both times, and for a moment I thought, maybe that meant something. Maybe that meant he was going to be all right. But when they finally took him off sedation, he didn't wake up the way I expected. He opened his eyes. That was it. No words, no movement, no recognition. Just staring, like he was looking straight through me. The doctors called it a vegetative state. Said it had already been weeks, and there was no way to know if he would ever come back. They used phrases like uncertain prognosis and neurological damage, but none of that really prepared me for what it felt like to sit beside him, to hold his hand and feel nothing in return, to talk to him, hoping, desperately hoping, that somewhere inside he could still hear me. I told him everything. I told him about the kids, about the house, about how frightened I was. I even told him silly things, like how the neighbor's dog still kept barking at night, just to fill the silence. Because silence was unbearable. By the second week, reality started creeping in. Bills had to be paid, decisions had to be made, and I realized something I had never thought about before. I didn't know any of his passwords. Not for the bank, not for his email, not even for his phone. It felt wrong at first, like I was crossing a line, but I didn't have a choice. We needed access. The kids needed stability. I needed to know what we were dealing with. So I tried. Birthdays, anniversaries, our wedding date. None of them worked. It was our daughter who finally guessed it. She stood there, holding his phone, frowning in concentration, and then, suddenly, click, unlocked. I remember the way she looked at me. A mixture of pride and something else. Something I didn't understand yet. I wish we had just used the phone for what we needed and left everything else alone. But we didn't. Because once you open a door like that, it's hard not to look inside. At first, it seemed harmless. Messages from coworkers, group chats, old photos. But then we started noticing things that didn't quite add up. Conversations that felt too familiar, too intimate. Names I didn't recognize. And then, one message, just one. It wasn't even that explicit, but it was enough. Miss you last night. That was all it said. And something inside me dropped. I told myself there had to be an explanation. A misunderstanding. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe it was old. But the more we looked, the worse it got. Far worse. There wasn't just one woman. There were dozens. Different names. Different threads. Some going back years. Some going back over a decade. 10 years. 10 years of conversations I knew nothing about. 10 years of a life I was never part of. And the tone, it wasn't friendly. It wasn't casual. It was intimate. Explicit. Personal in a way that made my stomach turn. I felt like I was reading messages meant for someone else's husband, not mine. Not the man I had built a life with. But then came the photos. Screenshots. Folders full of them. Women. People he knew. Not strangers. Not random accounts. Women from his past. School acquaintances. Old mates. People with names and faces and history. And they weren't just talking. They were performing for him. And he had saved everything. Every image. Every video. Organized. Documented. Like it meant something. Like it mattered. My hands were shaking so badly I had to sit down. I remember my son asking me if I was all right. And I couldn't even answer him. Because how do you explain something like that? How do you explain that the person lying in a hospital bed, hooked up to machines, fighting for his life, had been living a completely different life behind your back? And then we checked the bank account. That was the final blow. Negative 24 pounds. That's what we had. That's what was left. And yet, there it was. Transaction after transaction. Small amounts. Regular. Sent to those same women every month. Even when we were struggling. Even when we were cutting back on groceries. Even when I thought we were in this together. I didn't cry straight away. I just sat there, staring at the screen, feeling like everything I thought I knew wasn't real. And then it hit me all at once. The anger, the humiliation. 10 years. 10 years of secrets. And I never saw it. Or maybe I did. And I just didn't want to. I don't even know anymore. And the cruelest part, he was still lying there, breathing, existing, but not answering, not explaining, not defending himself, not just silent, like I was screaming into a void that would never answer back. Some days, I sat beside him and prayed he would wake up, not because I wanted things to go back to how they were, but because I needed answers. I needed to hear him say it. I needed to look him in the eyes and ask, why? Why wasn't I enough? Why did he build a second life instead of just leaving? Why did he let me believe everything was fine? But then there were other days. Days when I looked at him and I felt nothing. Or worse, resentment, because now I was the one left to clean up the mess. The bills, the children, the truth. And he got to just lie there, untouched by the consequences of what he'd done. And that thought terrified me, because I didn't know which version of me was real anymore. The one who still loved him, or the one who wished she had never known him at all. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The faint glow of my phone still burned into my eyes, replaying everything we had seen over and over again. Every message, every photo, every transaction. It was like my brain refused to accept it as real, because if it was real, then what had my life been? The next morning, I went back to the hospital like I always did. Same routine, same corridor, same sterile smell clinging to everything. But something had changed. It wasn't the machines. They were still there, humming softly. It wasn't him. He looked exactly the same as the day before. Eyes open, unfocused, drifting somewhere far beyond reach. No. The only thing that had changed was me. I stood at the door for a moment before walking in, just watching him. And for the first time in 6 weeks, I hesitated. I used to rush to his side, take his hand, start talking immediately, like if I stopped, something terrible would happen. But now I just stood there, wondering who I was even looking at. I finally stepped inside and pulled the chair closer to his bed. "Hi," I said softly. My voice sounded strange, like it belonged to someone else. "You're still here?" Nothing. No response, just the steady rhythm of the monitor. I swallowed, forcing myself to sit down. "I found your phone," I continued. Even saying the words made my chest tighten, and I unlocked it. Still nothing. I let out a slow breath, my fingers gripping the edge of the bed. "I know everything." The words hung in the air, heavy, final. And for a split second, just a split second, I thought I saw something. A flicker, a shift in his eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it came. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe I needed to believe there was still something left of him in there. "You could have just left," I whispered. My voice cracked this time. "You didn't have to do all of this." I waited. God, I waited. But all I got back was silence. The kind of silence that presses against your chest until you feel like you can't breathe. I stayed there for hours, talking, crying, sometimes just sitting. And every time I looked at him, I felt something different. Love, anger, confusion, disgust, grief. It was like mourning someone who was still alive, while also realizing they might never have been who I thought they were in the first place. That afternoon, my daughter came to visit. She walked in quietly, like she didn't want to disturb anything, even though there was nothing to disturb. Her eyes went straight to him, then to me. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded automatically. "Yeah, I'm fine." But she didn't believe me. I could tell. She sat down on the other side of the bed, staring at her father for a long moment before speaking again. "I keep thinking he's going to wake up," she said softly. "Like, any second." I didn't respond, because I didn't know what to say anymore. She hesitated, then added, "Did you look through everything?" I closed my eyes briefly. "Yeah." A pause, and I let out a bitter laugh. And I wish I hadn't. That was all it took. The tears came instantly, not just from me, from her too. Because now it wasn't just my pain, it was ours. "He lied to us," she said, her voice shaking. I wanted to correct her, say something like, "He lied to me," protect her from it somehow. But I couldn't, because the truth was, he had lied to all of us for years. We sat there together, the three of us, me, my daughter, and the man who had somehow become a stranger. And I realized something I hadn't let myself think about yet. This wasn't just about betrayal. This was about rebuilding everything from the ground up without him. That evening, I went home and started going through the finances more seriously. Not just the phone this time. Everything. Accounts, bills, statements. And the deeper I dug, the worse it got. There were subscriptions I didn't know about, payments that didn't make sense. Small amounts, but consistent, hidden, carefully spread out so they wouldn't draw attention. Except now, they all did. And suddenly, things started clicking into place. Moments from the past, times he said we were tight on money, times he brushed off expenses or avoided conversations about finances. I used to think he was just bad with money, or stressed, or overwhelmed. Now I knew better. He wasn't careless. He was hiding things. I sat at the kitchen table for hours, surrounded by papers, my head spinning. How long had this been going on? How many times had I trusted him while he was doing this behind my back? And the worst question of all, was any of it real? Our marriage, our memories, the way he looked at me sometimes, the way he said he loved me. Was that real? Or was I just part of the life he needed to maintain? A cover. A safe place to come back to after living out whatever fantasy he had built for himself. I felt sick, actually sick, like my body was rejecting the reality I was being forced to accept. That night, my son came home late. He had been staying with a friend more often since everything happened. I don't think he wanted to be in the house. Too many nerves, too much uncertainty. He walked into the kitchen, saw me sitting there, and froze for a second. "You're still up?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah." He hesitated, then pulled out a chair across from me. Neither of us spoke for a while. Finally, he said, "I looked at some of it too." My chest tightened. "I'm sorry," I said immediately. "You shouldn't have had to see that." He shrugged, but his jaw was clenched. "He's my dad," he said. "I think I had a right to know." I didn't argue, because he was right. "I don't get it," he continued. "Like, why stay? Why not just leave if he wanted all that?" I let out a slow breath. I don't know. And that was the truth. I didn't know. Maybe it was easier for him this way. Maybe he thought he could have both. A family, and whatever that other life was, without consequences. Until now. My son leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. "I don't know how I'm supposed to feel about him anymore," he admitted. Neither did I. Because how do you reconcile two completely different versions of the same person? The father who raised you, and the man who did all of this. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone in the sitting room. The house felt different, quieter, heavier. Like something fundamental had shifted. And I realized something that scared me more than anything else. He might never wake up. I might never get answers. No explanation, no apology, no closure. Just this open wound that would never fully heal. And I didn't know if I could live with that. But I also didn't know if I had a choice. Because life doesn't pause for things like this. It keeps moving, whether you're ready or not. And the next morning I had to go back to the hospital, sit beside him again, look at his face, and pretend I wasn't breaking all over again. A few days later, something happened that I wasn't prepared for. I was back at the hospital, sitting in that same chair that had practically molded to my body by that point, when one of the doctors asked to speak with me privately. There was something in his tone that made my stomach drop instantly. Not urgent, not panicked, just serious. The sort of serious that means your life is about to change again. I followed him into a quiet room down the hall, my hands already cold before he even said a word. He closed the door gently and gestured for me to sit. "I want to talk to you about his condition," he began. I nodded, trying to brace myself. "He's stable," the doctor continued,
but there hasn't been any significant neurological improvement.
I swallowed. What does that mean? I asked, even though I already knew. It means, he said carefully, that the longer he remains in this state, the lower the chances of meaningful recovery. Meaningful. That word hit harder than anything else. Not just recovery. Meaningful recovery. As in waking up and actually being himself again. Talking. Moving. Recognizing us. Being present. I stared at the floor, my mind racing. So, what are we supposed to do? I asked quietly. The doctor hesitated, and in that hesitation, I felt it, the weight of what he was about to say. There are decisions, he said slowly, that families sometimes have to consider in situations like this. My chest tightened. What kind of decisions? He didn't answer right away, but he didn't have to. I understood. Life support, continuing treatment, letting go. Words that had always felt distant, theoretical, until now. I'm not saying you have to decide anything right now, he added quickly, but I want you to start thinking about what he would have wanted. What he would have wanted. The irony of that question almost made me laugh, because suddenly I wasn't sure I knew him well enough to answer it. I nodded numbly, thanked the doctor, and walked out of that room feeling like the ground beneath me had disappeared. When I got back to his bedside, I just stood there, looking at him, really looking this time. The rise and fall of his chest, the stillness of his body, the emptiness in his eyes. And all I could think was, who are you? Not the man I married, not the man I thought I knew, but this person, this stranger. This man who had built an entire hidden life while sharing a home with me. This man who might never wake up to explain any of it. I sat down slowly, my heart pounding. They want me to make decisions, I said out loud. My voice sounded hollow. About whether you stay like this or not. I laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. Can you believe it? Silence. Of course. I don't even know who you are anymore, I admitted. And saying that out loud broke something inside me, because it was the truth. A truth I had been avoiding. A truth I didn't want to face. I leaned forward, resting my forehead against his hand. You should have told me, I whispered. Anything, something. Tears slipped down my face, soaking into the thin hospital blanket. I would have been angry. I would have been hurt. But at least it would have been real. I pulled back, wiping my eyes roughly.
But this, I continued, this isn't real. This is just pieces.
Pieces of a man I thought I knew. Pieces of a life I thought we shared. And none of it fit together anymore. That night, I called a family meeting. Just me and the kids. We sat around the dining table. The same table where we used to eat supper together. Laugh, argue, talk about our days. Now it felt like a courtroom. Heavy. Tense. Unavoidable. I told them what the doctor said. I watched their faces as the reality sank in. My daughter started crying immediately. My son just stared at the table, his hands clenched into fists.
So, we have to decide? He asked finally.
I nodded. Not right away, but soon. The silence that followed was unbearable. Do we even know what he would have wanted? My daughter asked. And there it was again, that question. The one that felt impossible to answer. I hesitated.
I thought I did, I said slowly. But now, I don't know anymore.
Because the man I thought I knew, would he have wanted to be kept alive like this? Would he have wanted us to hold on, no matter what? Or would he have chosen to let go? I looked at my children, my heart breaking all over again. I don't want to make this decision alone, I said, and I meant it. Not just because it was too heavy, but because whatever we chose, we would have to live with it together. Over the next few days, everything felt surreal. I went back and forth between the hospital and home, between grief and anger, between love and something darker. Some moments I would sit beside him and remember the good things. The way he used to make tea every morning. The way he laughed at his own jokes. The way he held my hand without thinking. And in those moments, I missed him so much, it physically hurt. But then, I would remember the messages, the photos, the lies, and something inside me would harden. Because how do you miss someone and resent them at the same time? How do you grieve a person who is still alive while also feeling betrayed by who they were? I started noticing something else too, a shift in myself. At first, I thought I needed answers, closure, a confrontation. But slowly, that need started to fade. Not completely, but enough for me to realize something important. Even if he woke up, would it change anything? Would an explanation undo 10 years of deception? Would an apology fix what had already been broken? Or would it just give me words for something that had already spoken for itself? One afternoon, I sat beside him again, watching the monitors, listening to the steady peeping. I used to think I needed you to wake up, I said quietly. I paused. But I don't think that's true anymore. The words surprised even me. I think I needed the truth, I continued. And now I have it. It wasn't the kind of truth I wanted. It wasn't clean. It wasn't fair. But it was real. And maybe that was enough. I looked at him one last time, not as my husband, not as the man I loved, but as someone I had known once, a long time ago. And in that moment, I felt something shift. Not forgiveness, not yet, but acceptance. The kind that doesn't bring peace straight away, but makes it possible. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was drowning. I felt like I was standing, barely, but standing. And maybe that was the beginning of something new, something I hadn't even considered yet, a life without him. The decision didn't come all at once. It wasn't some dramatic moment where everything suddenly became clear. It came quietly, in pieces, in the spaces between hospital visits, in the long drives home, in the silence that followed every conversation that didn't have an answer. A week later, we sat down again, me and the kids, same table, same heavy air. But this time, something was different. We weren't just reacting anymore. We were deciding. I've been thinking, I said slowly, my hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long gone cold. Neither of them spoke. They just waited. Because I think they knew whatever I said next mattered. I don't think he would have wanted this, I continued. My voice didn't shake this time. It surprised me because part of me expected to break down, but I didn't. I just spoke. I don't think he would have wanted to be kept alive like this. Not really living, not able to speak, not able to be himself. My daughter wiped her eyes. My son nodded slowly, staring at the table. I agree, he said quietly. It wasn't emotional, not like before. It was steady, and somehow that made it heavier, because this wasn't grief talking anymore. This was acceptance. I don't want him to suffer, my daughter whispered, and I don't want us to keep waiting for something that might never come. There it was, the truth we had all been circling around, waiting. That's what we had been doing, waiting for him to wake up, waiting for answers, waiting for closure. But what if that moment never came? How long do you wait before you realize you're just holding on to something that's already gone? I looked at both of them, my heart aching, but clearer than it had been in weeks. "Then we make the decision together," I said. And just like that, it was done. Not officially, not yet, but in that moment, something inside all of us shifted. We weren't waiting anymore. The next day, I met with the doctor again. I told him what we had decided. He listened carefully, nodding, explaining the process in a calm, professional tone. Words like comfort care, withdrawal of life support, keeping him peaceful. I nodded through all of it. Signed papers I never imagined I would have to sign. And then we set a date. It felt unreal, like planning something that should never have to be planned. But at the same time, it felt necessary, because dragging it out would only make it harder. That night, I went to the hospital alone. I didn't tell the kids. Not yet. I needed one last moment. Just me and him. I walked into the room slowly, closing the door behind me. The machines were still there, still doing their job, still keeping him here. I pulled the chair closer and sat down, looking at him for a long time before saying anything. "This is it," I said softly. "No tears." "Not yet. They're going to take the machines off tomorrow." The words sounded strange out loud. "Final. Real." I thought I'd feel more broken, I admitted, but I don't. And that was the truth. I didn't feel numb. I didn't feel detached. I just felt steady. "I think I already grieved you," I continued. "Not when you got sick, but when I found out the truth." My throat tightened slightly. "But that doesn't mean I don't care," I added quickly, because that mattered. It mattered to me. "I did love you," I said. "Maybe I still do. I don't even know anymore." I let out a small breath, shaking my head. "You made that complicated." I reached out, resting my hand lightly on his. Cold. Unresponsive. Still. "I wish things had been different," I whispered. "I wish you had been honest. I wish you had given me a chance to understand, or to leave, because that was the part that hurt the most. Not just what he did, but the fact that he never gave me a choice. He decided everything on his own and left me to deal with the consequences." "I don't hate you," I said after a moment. That surprised me, because I thought I did, at least at the beginning. "But I don't think I can forgive you either. Not right now, maybe not ever." And that was all right, because forgiveness wasn't something I owed him. It was something I would give myself when I was ready. I sat there for a long time after that. No more words, just presence. A quiet goodbye. The next day, we all went together. Me, my daughter, my son. The room felt different, not because anything had changed, but because we had. We stood around the bed, each of us holding on to something invisible. Memories, pain, love, resentment, all tangled together. The doctor explained everything again, slowly, gently, making sure we understood, making sure we were ready. I don't think anyone is ever really ready for something like that, but we nodded anyway. And then it began. They turned off the machines. One by one, the sounds changed, the rhythm shifted, and suddenly the room felt very, very quiet. I held his hand. My daughter stood on one side, my son on the other. No one spoke. There was nothing left to say. And then, after a while, it was over, just like that. No dramatic moment, no last words, just silence. I thought I would collapse. I thought I would break, but I didn't. I stood there, breathing, existing, feeling everything and nothing at the same time. Because the truth was, I had already lost him a long time ago. We left the hospital together, not saying much, just walking. When we got outside, the air felt different, lighter. Not because things were okay, but because something had ended. And for the first time in weeks, there was nothing left to wait for. That night, I sat alone in the sitting room again. Same place. Same silence. But it didn't feel as heavy. Not like before. Because now, there was clarity. Painful, messy, complicated, but clear. And I realized something I hadn't let myself think about until that moment. I was free. Not in a happy way, not in a relieved way, but in a real way. The truth was out. The waiting was over, and the life I thought I had was gone. Which meant I could start building something new, something honest, something that belonged to me. I looked around the house, taking in everything. The memories, the echoes, the pieces of a life that no longer existed. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was trapped in it. I felt like I could walk forward, slowly, carefully, but forward. If you were in my place, what would you have done? Would you have made the same decision? Or would you have kept waiting, hoping for answers that might never come? Sometimes I still think about that, about all the things I'll never know. But I've learned something through all of this. Closure doesn't always come from answers. Sometimes it comes from choosing to move on anyway.
And if you've ever faced something like this, or you think you would have handled it differently, I genuinely want to hear your thoughts.
Because stories like this don't end neatly. They just end.